What's up, everybody? And welcome back. We're back in office studio. And so many people sent me another interview by ex-judge Elizabeth Shearer. This time with Law and Crime, Jesse Weber doing the interview. It's a little bit longer, a lot more information. I assume I have not watched this one yet, but the last one we did was pretty short. So I assume we're going to get more information, more details, things that we don't know about coming in during this interview. So we're going to watch it together. We're going to jump right in, hit that like button if you guys are enjoying this content. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to break down, see what she has to say, any more explanations, anything to react to, what she's doing now. Who the heck knows what she's going to say, right? That's the point of watching the interview, which we're going to do together, and I will react to as we go.
Them, and I felt that needed to, and at times it was some family members where maybe.
Hold on a second. Somehow it jumped up. Here we go. All right, here we go now.
So is everybody. Everybody's not feeling great. Just want to let everybody know if voice is a little off, that's completely fine. I've been there relatively recently too. So, but thanks for coming on, especially when you're not feeling well. So I want to talk to you for a while. This case, when you were selected to oversee this case, what were you feeling? Because you knew how high profile and how big it was going to be.
It's a little too fast, I think, for the playback. So we'll bump it down just a little.
You know what? I felt ready. I knew that I was the judge for this case. I had a lot of experience. A lot of people don't know this, but I was a prosecutor for over 10 years, 11 years.
It's not surprising that she was a prosecutor for 11 years, right? Based on what happened and how the trial went. So I think a lot of people could have guessed, even if they didn't know.
And I tried a lot of cases. And so I felt like, here we go. I can do this.
Yeah, and you played it so cool and calm and collected when you had it. I always think that, like, whenever we're covering like the Alec Murdaugh trial, we're covering the Johnny Depp trial, I think about the judge a lot, and I'm like, think about all the attention that's on these people who are going to be presiding over this monumental case. And when it was handed over to you, was there any kind of prep that you did? I mean, you talked about your career as a career criminal prosecutor. Obviously, it's a great experience, but did you do any kind of prep for this case?
Well, sure. So Florida, I think, is one of the few states remaining that has the death penalty, or that it doesn't have some type of moratorium on the death penalty. But as you can imagine, even though I had tried capital cases, I had not presided over a death penalty case because they're few and far between. So I met with some of my colleagues that had actually tried death penalty cases that were assigned to the civil divisions at the time, but had previously tried death penalty cases, and read every case I could get my hands on. I have binders and binders, hundreds of cases. I read everything that I could find.
And for people that are going to jump to, oh, see, she wasn't experienced, blah, blah, blah. There's not a ton of these cases. Not a ton of judges have experience trying these cases. You may not know there are some career family law judges that end up in criminal courts as the judges, or career prosecutors that end up as the family law court judges that have never practiced in that area. So it's not that unusual. She did her job. She prepped. That's what she's supposed to do. So I appreciate that. And that's not clearly she didn't know what she was doing because she had never tried a death penalty case before. That's very common for judges.
There.
How is that different, presiding over that kind of case, than another one?
So in reality, it's the same as trying any other case. The evidence, the rules of evidence.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The procedure is the same. The difference is it's more highly scrutinized. So you have to be really on your A game, bring your A game when it comes to knowing the law and being quick to be able to answer legal questions that come up, or issues between the attorneys, because you can't say, well, I need a minute. Although, of course, you can say that. And I did say that from time to time. I think my words were, I'm going to take this under advisement, my favorite famous words, so that I could think about it and put something, a thoughtful ruling in writing, and make sure that it would be very clear as to what my findings were. But the biggest difference is just knowing that those cases are more highly scrutinized on appeal in the event that the defendant is sentenced to death, which, of course, in my case, he was not.
And I'm not going to lie to you, I've covered a number of different cases, death penalty cases, all different kinds of murders. This case, for me, watching it, was not only a very long trial or phase, but it was one of the most emotionally gripping cases. It was hard. For me, there was times I got emotional listening to this, and it was really, really tough. And I think it was tough for our viewers. Being a part of this day in and day out, what impact did that have on you?
It's draining because, the judge is the only person in the courtroom that can't cry. In fact, I don't think there was a dry eye in the courtroom. Deputies, even the big, strong, manly, tough deputies that were covered.
Lawyers aren't supposed to cry either, right? As we've seen in the Crumbly case, they can, but they're not supposed to. Anybody that's really there doing their job should not be crying. Now, penalty phase is a little bit different than the guilt phase, but she's right. It is tough. And I'm sure it was emotionally exhausting for her to handle this case. I'm sure that was part of the stressors and everything that went on and that she had to deal with in this process. I'm sure it was incredibly difficult and exhausting.
During the case for me, and many times I would look up and see tears rolling down their cheeks, and those guys are pretty tough. They're made of Teflon, most of them, but there wasn't a dry eye in there. And of course, the judge has to maintain composure, because I think if the judge lets loose, then it's going to be not good for anyone. So
Correct.
it was hard. I had to listen, but keep some distance between myself and the words that were actually coming out of the witnesses' mouths and the pictures. You sort of have to put up like a plexiglass, if you will, and listen and hear and understand, but keep that barrier, somewhat of a barrier, so that you don't lose it.
Was there one day or one piece of evidence that really stood out to you and that maybe stays with you to this day that you think about?
There were two things that I actually had to take a recess, because I was unable to. I felt that I was going to be unable to keep my composure. There was a day during the victim impact statements, um, when Luke Hoyer's parents were talking, and they just, it was all heartbreaking. But when they got up, it broke my heart. I couldn't, and I have to tell you, it was like that for everyone in the courtroom. There was something about Tom Hoyer's testimony that was absolutely heartbreaking. It was like you could hear your own words coming out of his mouth, if that makes sense. That day was really really hard. And the other day was when they played I'm sorry, the audio that
Mm.
a child had taken, a cell phone audio, and you could hear the kids screaming and the gunfire, and you could just put yourself right there, and imagine what it would be like to hear that kind of terror. And that gave me goosebumps. It was gut wrenching.
It's no surprise a case like this is going to have an effect like this on her. Not unusual. I'm sure lots of judges would echo the same kinds of feelings in cases that have these horrific of facts. Nothing horrible about it. But again, I do think what's interesting about the tone of this interview so far is it feels like we're starting to get somewhat of an explanation as to why she acted the way that she did and maybe let her guard down a little bit or showed a little bit too much emotion at the end because she was holding it all in as a career prosecutor throughout this entire case. And it was exhausting and just physically difficult for her as much as it was emotionally and mentally.
Hey, I just want to take a quick sidebar from Sidebar to really thank our sponsor of this video. It's right now, but option for manager or a that's to experience that. Any kind of view you can give us on what that experience was like for those jurors? I mean, it's just to let everybody know they visited the actual school that was sealed off on that day. So
Right.
all the book bags were there, all the blood stains were there, all the Valentine's Day cards were there. It was literally frozen in time. What
Yes.
did you make of that?
You know what? The jurors were very professional and diligent. They were observing everything that they could take in. You could tell they were concentrating. They were really trying to just take it all in, and pay attention to details. And there wasn't a lot of there was no emotional outbreaks or anything like that. It was just very very professional and very dutiful, if you will. They did their job as far as looking at everything and taking everything very seriously. And of course, I'm not sure if you know this, but they're not allowed to ask questions or interact
Right.
with the court or the lawyers during the walkthrough. So we just all sort of stood by and observed them. But it was very serious and strategic. We walked floor by floor, and they just observed everything very quietly. Some of them took notes, some of them didn't.
And what did you think of it?
It was hard. The hardest part was that it was frozen in time. You could see that nothing had been changed. The classrooms were still, in other words, if a student knocked over a desk, the desk was still knocked over in its exact place. The whiteboards with the writing on the walls and the Valentine's Day celebratory messages and things of that nature were still up. It was like going back in time
Yeah.
to the day, and then being able to picture what happened.
Yeah, I go back and I think about that evidence a lot. And look, one of the other things that I think I look upon a lot, and I know our viewers focus on upon a lot, was the shooter and the shooter's demeanor in that courtroom. What did you make of the way he was behaving in your courtroom?
He did everything his lawyers told him to. He was very diligent in listening to their advice. So whatever you observed was at the, not that I didn't hear, but I can only assume was at the advice of his attorneys. He sat quietly and listened to them very intently.
There was clearly a lot of tension between you and the defense counsel. What was that about when you look back on it?
I think that the defense attorneys were in over their head. They were inexperienced, and so there was only one of them.
Wow. Shots fired, no love lost. Interesting coming from somebody who other people have accused of being in over her head and inexperienced. Not me. That is not one of the accusations I've made. But she just goes right at them saying they were inexperienced, in over their head. I think, judging on how snarky they were through trial, I think they would say, well, it worked because we won, probably. But a lot of people had a problem with exactly how they handled this case, including me. I don't think they did things the right way or the way you should do them as a defense attorney. Some things, other things, I think they did do a good job. But she, no hairs across her tongue there. She takes a shot at them, says they were inexperienced and in over their head.
Out of, I don't know, 5 or 6 that was qualified to try a death penalty case, which is very unusual. That particular office in the past has had at least 5 to 10 attorneys, but under their current leadership, they had many attorneys quit, and so they only had 1 remaining that was actually even allowed by the Florida Supreme
I mean, that sounds like shots at the whole office. What do you guys think?
Court to try a death penalty case, and I think she was overwhelmed and, again, not experienced in this type of thing, so they just pulled every type of antic that they possibly could think of. And ultimately, I'm sure in their
And again, with the mindset of and the filter we're watching this through is she is explaining, the tone of this interview is explaining why she did and acted the way that she did during this trial. And she's telling you right now how she feels about this defense team. They were inexperienced, in over their head, and pulled every antic they could.
opinion,
Because a
it
bunch of people quit this office that were qualified.
worked because the defendant was not sentenced to the death penalty.
And I want to talk about that. Before we do, were you at all concerned about how this interaction you had with the defense would be perceived? Did you get any comments from people afterwards because it was being live streamed?
I mean, when I really had to, there were times when I felt to preserve the integrity of the trial and of the court, I had to get on them and say, enough, cut it out. You know, when lawyers act like children, the judge has to act like a parent and tell them, cut it out. Because it wasn't fair to the people that were involved and the victims' family members that were sitting.
They acted like children. I mean, she's going at them. She's taking this opportunity here to really go at them publicly, go at this defense team. And again, I mean, she's not a judge now, so she can say what she wants about them. But I think, saying this about the public defender's office would have been problematic if she was still on the bench there in South Florida.
There watching them day after day. I mean, one of their attorneys was literally brushing her hair in the middle of the trial. They were on their phones. They were giggling. They were, talking. They were using their printer whenever the state was questioning their witnesses. They were almost like, have you ever seen that whack-a-mole game at a carnival? It was like every time I looked over there, and normally as a judge, I look over and I give a look, and that's it. The lawyers see it and they go, "Uh-oh, we need to cut it out." Well, a look didn't work with them. I had to give them a look, and then another look, and then tell them, "Be quiet, stop doing that." And I finally had to say, "Okay, listen, this is what we're going to do. The things that normally you would assume that lawyers know and that lawyers will abide by the rules of professional responsibility, I had to lay it out. There's no talking. There's no laughing. There's no passing notes unless you absolutely have to, because they would do it in such a way that it was extremely distracting to the rest of the court." And again,
Wow. Just firing away at them. And again, I think a lot of people in the chat are probably agreeing with her. But to hear her say this gives us a little window into her mind at the time that she was kicking lawyers out of the courtroom, saying things to these lawyers that were later reprimanded, and why she didn't hug both teams at the end of the trial. I mean, this is giving us insight into exactly how she was thinking at the time while watching these lawyers, working with these lawyers for months, dealing with these lawyers for months, treating them like children because she said that's how they were acting, trying to give them looks, reprimanding them, reminding them of the rules of professional responsibility because they weren't following them or abiding by them.
the victim's family members were maybe 20 feet away, 25 feet away, watching all of this. They had a better view than I did, and at times it was embarrassing. because it wasn't fair. It wasn't their day in court. It was the victim's day in court and the defendant's day in court, but they were making it about them, and I felt that needed to be stopped.
I appreciate you saying
The defense attorneys were making it about them, and I felt it needed to be stopped. Interesting.
that because and adding context to that because a lot of people might not have understood why it blew up the way that it did and to add kind of what we maybe didn't see or hear. I appreciate you said that because you look back on one of the most tense days was that the blow up regarding the victim impact statements and what the defense counsel said. Do you look back on that and say you regret any part of how that was handled, or you wish you said something differently, or do you stand by this? You were totally justified in your response to the defense counsel.
Looking back and looking over the transcript, yes, I do see there were times where the victims should have been stopped by me and sort of redirected.
Whoa. Whoa. She's admitted it. I got so much hate for saying this. I did not think she was going to admit that. So again, I haven't watched this interview. So this is the first time I'm seeing this. And I've already changed the title of this video probably multiple times because of some of the stuff that has come out. Wow. So she admits that there were certain people, again, we want to give victims the absolute max amount of leeway, but not to go after defense attorneys, their kids, things like that. As horrible as this all may seem and feel, maximum leeway against the defendant and what they could say about the defendant. But there are certain lines for the people doing their jobs in that courtroom, even if you hate them, even if you wish they did not exist. And for her to admit that, to me, is a pretty big deal. I'm going to back it up just so we can hear it again to make sure I heard it right.
Looking back and looking over the transcript, yes, I do see there were times where the victims should have been stopped by me and sort of redirected. There was one particular victim who had a strong accent, and she was using the word defender where she meant defendant.
Mm.
And so when you read the transcript, you go, oh, that's why everybody thought she was saying defendant. Excuse me, defender, meaning public defender, but she was talking about the defendant. Those types of things don't connect until you go back and you either listen to it very carefully,
They probably connect when you are the defender, right? Just like when somebody said something and brought her into it, it definitely connected. So I do think giving people the benefit of the doubt and the grace that we can give, that we're able to give, she's got to understand why the defense attorneys probably felt that way when the word used was actually defender. Even if it was a mistake or a slip up or things like that, we just have to understand people that did catch it in the moment, how they felt.
very slowly, um, and or read the transcript. So things that I was perceiving, in other words, I knew the context she was saying defendant, excuse me, defender, meaning defendant, where everyone else thought she was talking about the public defender or defender of the shooter. So yes, there were times where I should have redirected the victims, in hindsight, but at the time it was very emotional and I was trying to let them have their day in court.
And I want you to take the time to clear up any misconception that people might have regarding your decision to leave the bench and how this unfolded, because I understand that there might be a misunderstanding about this.
Yes. So I told the chief judge, first of all, I was appointed when I was 35 or 36. I never intended for this to be a lifetime appointment. It's not like on the federal bench where it is a lifetime appointment. You run every 6 years. And I had served two, I think I was into my second term. Wait a minute. Second or third term. Because the first term you don't wait 6 years. You run when that position is open. In other words, whenever that seat was going to be open, when you take it, you have to stand for the first election. So my first term was only like 18 months. So I believe I was in the middle of my third term. And I had told the Chief Judge, Jack Tudor, who, by the way, was very supportive and wonderful and throughout this whole process. And I had told him, Judge, I will serve until this trial is finished, till it's completed, and I won't leave early because I knew that the continuity was very important. But I told him when the trial is over, either immediately or very shortly thereafter, I'm going to retire and I'm going to move on and do something else. So
she made the decision before the trial was over that she was going to be done, but she did stay on because continuity was important to finish the trial. Totally fair point. Just from the chat, do you believe her? I'm going to say I believe her. I take things at face value. I want to believe people. What's the general feeling of the chat?
that plan was in place for years, nothing specific.
For years.
Then I put in my notice with the chief judge and the governor pretty much at the exact same time that I was served with the paperwork saying that there was a professional complaint.
So she put in her paperwork basically at this. So they talked about it, but the paperwork was not official until basically at the same time as the professional complaint.
Conduct complaint filed against me regarding the cruise trial. So the two events were separate and not related to one another. I was not required to resign. In fact, even in the
I do
findings,
believe that. I believe she was not required to resign. I think she took the opportunity to resign when it presented itself, but maybe that happened much earlier. If she said it, I will believe her. I don't know anything to say otherwise. Context, I think, opens it up for discussion, but she said she was always planning on leaving after this cruise trial.
of the Judicial Qualification Commission, they wrote that my resignation had nothing to do with the proceeding or the complaint that was filed or pending.
So, in other words, your plan was always to step down off the bench, regardless of what
Yes,
had happened in that courtroom.
yes, yes.
And talk,
Although they
yeah,
probably made it a little bit easier to take the next step by the way that that trial unfolded. I mean,
I
it's
love it. I love it. That screams honesty to me. She's like, I was planning on probably retiring. Cruz was probably going to be my last case. But then once all that happened, I was like, "Yup, I'm done. I'm done being a judge." So I get it. That screams true to me. That she was considering leaving and how all of it unfolded. The timing of the complaint being kind of simultaneous with her being like, "That's it. I'm done. I don't need to do this anymore."
certainly didn't leave a good taste in my mouth about the judicial system, but like that situation was very unique and like I said, does not that's not I don't want anyone to think that that's typical behavior of how lawyers act in my circuit because it isn't. It's
They're so much worse than a typical lawyer in her circuit, which is really interesting for her to say. It left a bad taste in her mouth about the judicial system. I don't know if she meant the judiciary or what, but that's interesting. I would have liked maybe he does expand because again, there's still 10 minutes left and I haven't seen this whole interview, but I would have liked to know what she meant. What bad taste about the judicial system? And you're still practicing as a lawyer. So what do you think about the judicial system? Just the criminal justice system? There's an interesting comment to be made by a judge who was a judge 5 minutes ago. It's interesting.
it's something that most people have absolutely never seen before, and the judiciary was horrified by as a whole by the way that those lawyers, particular lawyers, behaved.
talking
I think that's probably not a surprise, right? Chat feels the same way. We felt the same way, flipping the bird, the disrespect, some of the annoyances that they caused in the trial. But as a judge, during trial, you got to keep your composure as much as you can. And I thought there was plenty of times she kept her composure perfectly. It's not like she just flew off the handle all the time. It was multiple days and weeks and months where we found just a couple of times where we were like, and then at the end really was the biggest problem, in my opinion. The way she spoke to just those couple lawyers during the victim impact and hugging the prosecutors at the end and just some of the comments that were made at the end, I think were worse than how she handled them during trial because any judge would have had a difficult time with these lawyers. I do agree with her there.
about what happened in
Sure.
that courtroom, though. So we know that Nicholas Cruz, the jury recommended for the shooter, they recommended life in prison. I
Right.
imagine, though, no matter what they came back with, it wouldn't have been easy for you
No.
to come forward with a sentence. If you could talk about what it was like for you to sentence somebody to life in prison in this kind of case, what was that like for you?
Well, the verdict form, first of all, there was 17 victims. And so the verdict forms were 4 or 5 pages, single space pages for each individual victim. And so as a judge, the first thing you do is you have to look through the verdict forms. And that took me a while because, of course, the jury could find life on one particular victim, perhaps finding that the state didn't meet its burden of heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And for example, the very last victim, number 17, was a young man named Peter Wang, and he was let's just say out of all the victims, he probably got the worst or close to the most the most physical damage. I don't know how to put it. I don't want to.
No, I understand. I understand.
It was so as I'm going through these verdict forms, even you go one and then two and then three, and I know that number 17 is Peter Wang. So I really didn't know that the verdict was life across the board until I got to the 17th one, and I saw that they had found life for number 1 through 17.
Just to jump
Reading that
there,
verdict,
I
sure.
wasn't surprised. As soon as I saw the first victim that they found life in prison, I assumed it was going to be that. I didn't. That's so interesting that you thought there was a possibility that they would come back
Yeah.
for the death penalty with respect to one victim. I thought whatever decision they have for one, it would be for all of them.
Well, in my experience, and even though I've not tried a death penalty case, okay, I tried a lot of cases that had 10, 20 life penalties. So they have those interrogatory verdict forms where if you find A, you go to B. If you find B, you go to C. And there are pages and pages and pages. And I've had many, dozens, as a lawyer and a judge, where one victim they find not guilty, and then the next victim they find guilty as charged. Yes, did he discharge a firearm? Yes, did he inflict great bodily harm? And then you go to the next one, and guilty as charged. However, no, there wasn't great bodily harm. So I've had um, verdicts for sure, especially if the jurors are very diligent and very methodical in going through each count. There's definitely cases where a jury finds that the state met its burden as to one victim, but not as to another. Maybe I was naive in this case to think that, but I hoped that they did their job and that they looked at each victim separately.
Were you surprised?
Yes, I was. I was very surprised. Um,
I think that was
to me,
obvious, and
the state
so
met its
was
burden.
the rest of Florida, including myself. I was shocked that they came back with life. So it's not a surprise that the judge was also surprised, right?
I was very surprised. Um, to me, the state met its burden and then some. I mean, it's whether the aggravators outweigh the mitigators, and the aggravating circumstances. I mean, planning and methodically.
Here's the issue, though. As a judge, if you disagree with the verdict, it just is what it is. It's part of the job. You can't let that come out. You can't let it come out in your actions and your tone and your voice and what you say and how you conduct yourself. You just can't do that.
Carrying out this gruesome killing, and then writing a manifesto in the jail about to the next school shooter and what that person should do and how much it would cost and the supplies that they needed. I mean, there was so much premeditation, and the details were just horrific, horrific.
Do you happen to know any idea why they came back with that decision?
I don't know. I mean, it's not. And again, I'm not finding fault with the jury's verdict because it was their verdict. They were sworn. They took an oath, and that was their decision to make. And ultimately, even if the juror in Florida, even if they find that the prosecution has met its burden of proof and that the aggravators outweigh the mitigators, the jury can still find. However, we want to find in favor of life,
Right.
and that's okay. They're allowed to do that. So, and we tell them that, and that's part of the instruction. So, in this case, they decided that they wanted to spare his life.
And when you sentenced him, going back to that, what was that like? And I think what I've also always wanted to ask you is if the jury had come back with the death penalty, what would that have been like for you to officially sentence somebody to death? I mean, were you mentally prepared to do that? I mean, you sentenced him to life
Well,
in prison. So if you could walk us through that too.
sure. I mean, as a judge, you have to follow the law. So even if you don't like it, and I'm not saying I don't like the law, I like it or I don't like it. It doesn't really matter because you have to follow the law. And in this case, I do feel that the prosecution had met its burden, and that the aggravators outweighed the mitigators. So if the jury had found in favor of death, then I would have had to conduct a hearing and re-review all of the testimony and evidence and make sure that the decision was legally sound. And then I
What do you guys think? Do you think she would have reverted it to life? Because a judge can't switch from life to death, but they can switch from death to life. Obviously, she would not have done that. Although she would have had to take the extra steps professionally and do her job, she obviously would not have kicked it back down to life, which I think I would have agreed with her if she didn't do that.
would have. So um, it would have been weeks where I would have had to go through all of the testimony and evidence and do a very detailed written order. But that was part of the job, and I was, as much as you can be prepared for it. I was. It wouldn't have been easy because sentencing another human being to a punishment of even 5 years in prison is not an easy task. But when it is necessary to protect the public, it's something that as a judge you just have to you have to do it, and then you have to understand it's for the good of the people, and you have to move on. But it's not easy.
It was also the end of a chapter in what is a very traumatic and emotionally taxing case. And now the victim's family members, they're trying to move on with their lives. Have
Yeah,
you still remained in contact with them, the people who spoke out in court? Are you in touch with them at all?
I am. I recently was invited by it's a nonprofit organization. I think it's called, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. Um, Shoot, sorry, I just can't remember. But it's a nonprofit organization that helps anybody in the community that has been affected by the shooting. So they provide They have a really nice facility where you can go and sit down. They have all of these beautiful paintings on the walls. You can stop by, you can visit. I believe they provide counseling and those types of services. It's located right on University, right on the border of Coral Springs and Parkland. So this nonprofit invited me to have dinner with the victims' family members back in November, and it was absolutely an honor. It was really great.
That's great. That's great. And how are the family members doing? I mean, how are these families and loved ones doing?
You know, they're all making sure that their children did not die in vain, is what I can say. They are making the most of such a terrible situation. It's the type of thing where I don't know if I could do it.
Yeah.
They have they have every reason in the world to just be mad. To be mad at the world. I mean, because why? I mean, I think about it all the time. Why? Why did this happen? Why? Why does this happen? I mean, it's unspeakable.
I agree with her here. And with the victims, I mean, it's impossible to think about what they're going through, which is why we give them all the latitude we possibly can. Even if we, think that we wouldn't say what they're saying, it's impossible to put ourselves in their shoes.
And the fact is, I believe that most people in this world are good and most people are kind. There are a few that are just evil. But these family members have developed nonprofit organizations. They have one of them sends underprivileged children, pays for them to go to summer camp. They have walks. They have all kinds of fundraising, beach cleanup, and all kinds of things to honor their particular children. In fact, starting on January 28th, today is dedicated to Alyssa Al-Hadef. And what they ask people to do is participate in outdoor activities. January 29th is Scott Beagle. He was a coach, run, jog, or walk. And then it goes all the way through to February 14th, where they ask people to spend the day with your loved ones so that you can appreciate what you have, which is it's beautiful. And each day is for each victim, and it talks about something that particular victim liked to do with their life, and they want people to really celebrate and remember their very young lives, which is beautiful.
That is beautiful. That's amazing. That's an amazing thing to do. Judge, listen, I don't want to take too much of your time up. I wanted to ask you one more question. My understanding is you have a book coming out as well. If you could talk to us about what the book is about and what we can expect, because again, I think it's important for people who've been following this case and been following you and following your career to understand a little bit more about what was going on.
So we're in the very beginning stages, but it's going to be, and when I say beginning, I'm talking just, an outline at this point. I do have a publisher that has taken me on, or that's very interested, and that is going to be helping me with this through this process. But it's going to be all of the ins and outs and a lot of the details that were not disclosed during the trial. It's going to go through a back.
Oh my gosh. So we had Miss Becky, the clerk of courts, the first clerk of court that I know since, the modern day of streaming trials, write a book. Well, now we have the first judge who's stepping down after the trial to now write a book. She didn't step down to write the book, but she stepped down and is now writing a book. Is that why she's starting to do this tour of interviews? Gosh, that's interesting to me. I did not see that coming. Did you guys see that coming? Let me know what you think in the comments.
Through my life, how I became sort of developed into a judge, what I did before, my role as a prosecutor, my family, because I have everybody in my family is a lawyer, including both of my older brother, my younger brother, and my dad, and my sister-in-law. And I have also cousins, like way too many lawyers in one family. But it'll be a lot about that, and a lot about sort of the drive and the things that motivated me to become a judge, and then what I'm doing now. It doesn't sound that exciting when I'm saying it like that.
No, I think we all look forward to reading it because, again, this is, I guess you could even say what you're saying now is kind of a preview and a teaser to what you're going to be talking about more in depth.
Yes,
so when the book comes out, I'd ask you if you have a title, but I won't put you on the spot.
No,
all right,
I don't think so.
Listen, retired Judge Elizabeth Scherer, really thank you so much for coming on. Really,
wow, what a little bombshell there to end. Will anything problematic come out? Probably won't matter because the defense won, right? So, but if they didn't, and she said something in her book that could be problematic, this could be happening all over again. Although I think she's a little smarter than Becky Hill and how things were handled, and hopefully she handled everything appropriately and nothing comes out nefarious in her book. But that's interesting to me. I cannot wait to hear what you all think about that. I'm so glad you guys sent me this interview. I'm glad we were able to watch it together. Hit that like button on your way out. Subscribe to the page. Let me know what you thought in the comments, all the YouTube things. But for now, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.